This is Will Spencer from the Renaissance of Men here with the new 21 report and Socrates.
Hey, thank you.
Good to see you, man. So, you've been at the 21 convention since the very beginning, and this is year number 15.
Honestly, I've been around since the beginning.
Yeah.
I think that I missed the first three, to be really honest. But this is, I want to say, the 11th or 12th year.
Wow.
The 21st time I've been up on the stage. It's kind of one of those crazy. And you sit down and you go, there's this, I used to say there was this nervousness, about getting on stage that large
Sure.
and kind of, the cameras and everything else. And it's kind of alternative to what I normally do in my life. But the reality is it's not so much nervousness as excitement, the anticipation and desire to perform well. And so it's always exciting, whether it's your first time or, in this particular case, the 21st time.
So when you get to number 25, do you get a gold watch or something?
At this point, I'm just surprised they keep asking me back, So yeah, it's amazing because each convention's different. Each convention has its own identity. There's different ideas conveyed. Your sense of time and culture is a little bit different and shifted. And the environment in which we're talking in evolves and changes as well. And so to have been at that time period now, I sit down and I look forward to the next one because I know it's going to be an evolution of where we were. And I always look forward to seeing those modifications and changes and progressions. So,
if it's not too big of a question, how has 21 changed in the past 10, 11 years, or at least since you've been coming?
Dramatically and highly, highly dramatically. Initially it was a bunch of very young men bootstrapping, terribly underfathered. And they were doing a very vigorous and noble endeavor of trying to fill a void in their lives and take on that measure of agency. The problem is they had the worst instructors in the world themselves. And so, and that's true of anybody trying to teach them stuff. And so there was this reaching out. And so that there was a kind of an emphasis on where they felt most vulnerable, engagement with women, masculinity, those sort of things. And unfortunately at the time period, there wasn't a lot of really good, solid information around that was reaching them. It's not that it wasn't available, they may not have been known to them. And you have to deal with the world that you know. And if you don't know something that exists outside of it, you're not going to be going towards that source. Right. So as it's evolved, I think there's been other speakers, other content, other ideas that have spread that awareness, a refinement of those issues. And then also, there's going to be a transcendence, of what works, what doesn't work. You have to vet it out. And obviously the personalities change as well. The people conveying the information. I hate to say that the messenger is a message, but too often that's truly the case.
Sure.
But, if we take in, the fact that we've gone from young men bootstrapping themselves with masculinity and the ideas of what is it to be a man and the ideal man and to shoot towards that. We also look at now a narrative arc of what it is over multi-phases of your life. And we see that transcending into the Patriarch Convention, where you have that sort of stuff of men looking to wanting to be fathers that are fathers, what it is about fathering that's so important, and then looking in depth, multi-generationally. And then starting last year, quite honestly, if you believe men and women are compatible and complementary, and you want to have a conversation about the nature of human conditions, we cannot exclude women from the conversation because it's such a pivotal element of our humanity. And so bringing them in, not just as attendees or speakers, but a convention where they feel safe, it's directed towards them, is segueing, I think, to a greater audience to actually eventually merge together. And so I think what you're seeing now is not only did we have these three conventions, we had them all three simultaneously within proximity of each other, and there was a lot of overlapping, a lot of germination of individuals going from one to another, and in particular, the ladies talking to the guys and seeing what they had to offer and what was the conversations taking place there, that we have never had that conversation any other way. And I think there's something immensely important and human about looking somebody in the eye and holding a heart-to-heart conversation, whether it's about dating, relationships, about life, the intersexual dynamics, finance, business, any of those sort of things being conducted in person with another living human being.
Well, let's talk about the 22 convention. This is the second year. You spoke last year?
Yes, I did. Yes.
What differences did you observe in the 22 convention? How are things looking, for that innovation now?
Well, it's interesting. I when we look at these conventions in general, within the Manosphere, anybody can cobble together one convention.
Sure.
you can get out the door once.
Yeah.
It's the second one that matters, and so the first one, in a very real sense, we didn't know who would come, what the conditions were going to be. There was a tremendous amount of cultural blow up over it, and part of that was the marketing efforts associated with it. It created a tremendous amount of tension all the way around. That drove attention, but I think I guess it's debatable as how effective that was as far as trying to get true conversation going rather than having, the big splash of attention. And so I think there was a very concern, and oddly enough, I was the first speaker. And so you're doing this for the first time, and two, you don't know how it's going to be received or what's going to take place. And surprisingly, it went really well. And so there was dialogue. You were actually able, for the first time, to talk to women in this arena and have a dialogue. Even though we were doing the presentations, we were able to speak at length in between and during. And now I attended more of those talks than any of the other two, specifically because I was really interested in that dialogue. Mm-hmm. This time around, we didn't have any of that. You didn't have any of the feminist blowback. You didn't have any of that. It was much more relaxed, no anxiety. We had return attendees, which was fantastic to see, which I always like in a normal convention anyways, to see where people were, what's gone, how they've shaped it. And they were very inspired about what not only their experiences last year, but what they are anticipating this year, and then using that to springboard forward for the next year. Mm-hmm. And so we saw a lot more of that, and have that sort of dialogue. The conversations were continued. And I just found it a terribly rewarding experience just to be a part of that. And, the attendees that I've spoken to have really enjoyed it as well.
What did you talk about at 22 Convention?
Oddly enough, I did not talk about anything with relationships. Mm-hmm. I talked about civil resistance, particularly in the age of COVID and medical tyranny. And the issue on that was, I want to talk about culture, and how people navigate culture. And normally I talk about relationships because my concern is that I want people to be able to get along and to have healthy relationships. But if you don't have the skill set going into it, you don't want to be learning that on the job, at a point of conflict or a point of deterioration. So you really are going into a situation with the skills that you have. Okay. And so when we start with the guys with relationships, that was kind of the big one. If we're trying to improve relationships, then you naturally want to improve your prospects for marriage, and family development. So I've always focused in on that. Culture right now is overstepping all that. And the nature of the conversations, the nature of the things that are taking place, the tremendous impacts and losses of our civil liberties, freedoms, and just blatant disregard. We are probably, I hate to say it, in the most unscientific moment in our imaginable. It's science fiction stuff. I wouldn't believe the fiction if I was reading it.
Right.
And so there is a natural tendency to be angered by this, to be frustrated by this, and the anger is immense. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think in many ways it's a very, very natural human reaction to want to push back and to push back hard and to push back with violence. Right. And if you don't know any other means, that's all you use. So, for example, if we talk about boundary setting within a relationship, if you don't know how to manage boundaries appropriately in a relationship, you'll manage that relationship inappropriately.
Right.
And I see that happening now at a societal level scale. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it's not a matter of, I'm going to be a drama queen, I'm going to pitch a fit and crash a relationship. No, we have people that are talking about armed rebellion, taking up arms against the state. We have people that have done things, and I don't want to project because I don't know, but you just sit down and say, January 6th, where you have the Capitol insurrection, the insurrection, the Instagram insurrection, an individual was killed.
Right. Right.
Was there a better way? And I'm not saying that they did their intent for clear, just, transparent elections were not justified. But they didn't understand the nature of true civil resistance and how important discipline and behavior needs to be. And so I talked about civil resistance, what's that meant, and why civil resistance is so much more dominating effectively than violence is. For example, most people don't know that armed resistance, overthrowing a tyrannical government, truly overthrowing the government, only exceeds a quarter of the time, less than a quarter of the time. But non-violent campaigns are typically 45% successful. So that's a 2-to-1 ratio. And if you're talking about trying to choose a path, I want to be going with the one more successful.
Right.
Now, not only that, the results of a successful campaign, either violent or non-violent, are dramatically different. The civil societies are dramatically different. When violence is interjected into the cultural language and behavioral patterns, it gets repeated, it gets spread.
Right.
And so one of the quotes I noted was, in the last 10 years, all those nations that are going through violence and civil strife or using campaigns have typically been birthed 30 years in the past with a violence campaign previously. And so when we look at, so for example, it's a cycle.
Yeah.
And it's a cycle that needs to stop. But how do you stop it when you can't trust the other side not to do violence?
Right, for sure.
And which is it's really kind of frightening. And if we look at historically, when you are overturning ideologies, the Russian Revolution, killed 60 million people, installing a social system of communism and socialism.
Right.
Okay. The Chinese outdid it with 80 million. In comparison, let's put it this way.
High score competition.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I know you don't mean it that way. Yeah.
And we're talking about the industrialization of killing. The Civil War itself was only 1.5 million people. Okay, in comparison.
Only.
Only. It's mortifying.
Yeah, but
I mean,
I understand what you mean.
But
what do World War I decades later, right?
Right. And so what do we think the next conflict's going to be? And by the way, if we're talking with the United States, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to. It's not that I don't want to just be a part of that. I don't want to inherit that world. I don't want to put my daughter into the world that will exist after that conflict.
Right.
Or my grandchildren. That's the idea of looking 3 generations deep. That going deep. What type of world are we creating? And saying, is this really what I want to see in this world? And so my talk, in essence, was to teach at least those general facts. And to also then to sit down and showcase, as powerful as some of the images you saw. So for example, on January 6th, the administration threw in 26,000 armed troops into the Capitol area.
For
the inauguration and to protect it after, to make sure they barricaded.
The National Guard troops stationed everywhere.
Yeah. And so was that a projection of power? And so one of the questions I asked is, does power flow from the barrel of a gun, as Mao Zedong states? Or is it really the consent of the governed? And so you kind of go through that. And when you have to throw 26,000 troops into a non-armed insurrection, that really is a selfie it's a lot of buffoonery, right? But the reality is in 2003, Georgia did the same thing and did overthrow the government because of very similar things.
Georgia.
Yes, Russian Georgia, because of fraudulent elections, non-transparency, and all the things that were in play at that time, and they insisted, and they ended up winning. They ended up convincing and overthrowing a very tyrannical, an authoritarian, illegitimate government, and were able to do so. So the powers that be knew that, right? And so they ended up throwing all these troops in place out of fear. And they felt they had to show power and seize the power and physically show it. How terribly different would have been, because remember, that evening the Capitol was cleared out, they were back to business, had they opened it up doors and had tours walking through the next morning as though nothing happened.
I know.
Would we be living in a different world? That would have been strength, immense strength, and trust in the American people. But what you saw was a government afraid of the people and afraid of loss of power that they had just seized, one way or another. And it doesn't spell well when you have all that background taking place in the background. And it's not just those sort of things. And then you look at all the other behaviors associated with I just happen to use COVID as kind of a nice, convenient way to ramp kind of the guys up to the point of saying, hey, look, let's look at more efficient ways.
Right.
The problem with civil resistance, though, in many cases, is that they look at destabilizing the pillars of the support of the administration. And to do that well, you have to look at all the major social institutions that support the regime and to sway them one way or another. Now, that's not a passive measure. You're actively, it's a strategy and techniques of persuasion, of coercion. It's confrontation. You are forcing confrontation on it, but nonviolent, all through legal means. But that takes decades on average. And we don't have decades. But I'm an architect. I can tell you, you can take a building down not by rattling the cage, the vertical structure, but undermining the foundation. And that foundation is the mass of people. And we live in a digital age in which we can create content just like this. We have the ability to cross-communicate, which is why digital social media censorship is so important. It's why they're doing it. Okay, our ability to communicate, exchange ideas over a broad base area. And if you sway people, and then the other one is not only convince them, okay, but to join you and to physically act on it, to march, to say no, to protest, to not accept the narrative. Those sort of things will stabilize or unstabilize a regime. And quite honestly, we know that the cliché saying is that politics lives downstream of culture. Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah. That's very true.
Obvious, yeah.
Okay, and politicians know that. And so why don't we look at forcing that? I think another fascinating stat was that no movement has failed when they've been able to mobilize 10% of the population. None. It's 100% successful at 10%. Mm-hmm. And the reality is there were some outliers that skewed it. Probably the mean for that is about 3.5%, and that's based on researchers' analysis of all these conflicts over 120 years.
Wow. Okay. So nothing has failed at 10%, but you can get the job done at 3%.
3.5 typically. So, but that's if you're overthrowing a government that's tyrannical and violent against its own people.
Where it's out in the open.
Mm-hmm. We don't live in that world right now. It's moving there, but right now they're not. It
depends. Quite. Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
And so I think the number is actually much lower. And so if the number is lower and the average nonviolent campaign has 1.6% of the population, you're pretty much 45% of the way there.
So wait. So just to make sure that I understand the numbers, 10% nothing has ever failed. Average is the mean you said is closer to 3.5%.
That's correct, right?
And now, but like really at 1.6%, you can probably make a pretty significant.
It's not. It's the 1.6% is the average nonviolent campaign population.
Average nonviolent is 1.6. High likelihood of success at
3.5. Right.
Guaranteed success at 10.
At 10%. And what you're saying is that even though we're only mobilizing those numbers, there's a much broader support within the population.
Right.
Okay, which then sways change. Okay, and it forces people to change the metrics in which they're making a decision. So, for example, Southwest Airlines with the pilots unions.
Right.
Supposedly there was no strike; they just had a business failure. Even though the administration was literally forcing the mandates down and pressuring them to do that.
I heard it was bad weather.
It's Florida sunshine. It's just too rich sometimes.
Yeah, the bad weather that only affects one airline.
One airline, fascinating. Yeah,
clouds chasing them through the sky.
Yeah, and science. I mean, yeah, it's
science. How is that not science?
Yeah, absolutely. So you and that would be one institution of power is unions being able to kind of step together and say no.
Yeah.
And affect change. And what we're talking about is doing it on a larger scale. And so when you look at just sheer population size. That's why groups are so important, large. And one of the reasons why I gave the same speech at 22 convention is that if you exclude sex, okay, as you know, most women are not wanting to pick up arms in general.
Right.
You're losing half your population base. Mm-hmm. And then, by the way, the demographics that's more inclined for social network mobilization, early discussion, alliance making, supporting, enabling things to actually sustain a movement forward tends to be female traits, which is one of the reasons why in a lot of these protests and a lot of these voter registration polls and all, you see dominated by the groundwork, the grassroots are always dominated by women. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so
soft power, because they wield soft power.
Absolutely right.
The men are like, call me when I need to get off the couch for the hard power.
Yeah, right, completely right. And so when you are able to talk to women and say, hey, it's not just that we need you. We desperately need you now to avoid what's coming, if violence, to prevent that violence, to prevent that alternative. Mm-hmm. And we need to act now. And the other is that we need you to engage your partner, okay? And this is where men and women are compatible and complementary to each other, particularly in this realm. And so it was really nice to be able to talk to women specifically about that, as opposed to my 21 talk, which was to a bunch of military-aged male guys who are naturally wound up, are looking to defend their values and cultures and implement change, and can be very easily swayed to join something like January 6th and have that go awry, but this time with violence.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And so you say, hey guys, just be very careful what you're doing. There's better, more efficient, more effective ways, and to create the change that you really truly idealize, not to make change that becomes even more oppressive, more and by intent, that gets mismanaged.
Mm-hmm. And it's a great insight.
And so I sit down and said, and from my personal perspective, if I sat quiet during this time period, it's not just that I'm missing a moment in time. I would not be able to respect myself going forward, having not spoken up, to have used the platforms that are available to me to be able to convey that information, to help not only create a better alternative, but to prevent real human tragedy. And so we backed that all up. I started out with trying to help individual guys improve their personal lives. It grew to helping the relationships, marriages, families, and then in this particular case, we're now at a societal level.
So looking back at the past 15 years of 21, the past 10, 12 years that you've been involved, are you surprised, like put yourself backwards in time, are you surprised, even setting aside the socio-political climate of right now, surprised that 21 has moved in this direction of family, society, even larger aesthetic and religious values?
And that's another one that's interesting, is it's not just in one vein that's changing. You just brought up religious value. I think my favorite panel that was recorded the other day on Red Man Group was the religious one. You had five or six individuals up there representing
five guys.
five or six different denominations and viewpoints on religion and faith and beliefs in God. Talk about that in very civil, open, communicating hate, and what was also interesting is that everybody looked for areas in which they mutually agree first, and then only highlighted, hey, it's not, this is where you're wrong, or this is what we believe. It's just this, or let me rephrase it, it wasn't where you're wrong, this is what we believe, and then profit it that way.
Consensus building first.
Consensus building, and that's not something you normally see in most manosphere environments or most environments in general when you talk about that.
That's a good, especially with religion in general.
Oh my God! The only thing more, the only other two topics we could have had that would have been worse other than that was sex and politics, right?
Yeah.
And
we're probably almost.
Yeah, and at some point we're grabbing all three lines, right?
Exactly.
And that's the 21 convention.
Yeah.
But to sit down and see that evolution and see that change, I sorely welcome it. And part of me sits down and says it's so intuitive. It was bound to happen because you have individuals that are truly growing in their interests and everything else that's going to manifest into something bigger. But as ideas share and cross-germinate, it's going to take more than just those inroads as well. Or you'll see a lot of growth going in multiple different directions, which I think we desperately need in society. We've somehow lost that. I love Jack Donovan because of a lot of the symbolisms that he talks about men going out making fires and that radiating, idea of light.
Yeah.
And the notion of men sitting around a campfire and people sitting around a campfire telling stories, communicating. And in many cases, you see that in other media. So, for example, TED Talks were 20-minute talks, right? Just short sound bites. Short 20 minutes. There's something to be said about Joe Rogan's 5-hour format podcast. In depth, at length, where things are rolling. And it's not just the subject matters, it's the experience of that evening. That I think we've lost that connection in this fast-paced moving culture,
The journey of the conversation.
The journey, absolutely, and how much more enlightening and fulfilling is that? And I honestly have a hard time turning on entertainment media to watch a 2-hour video or something, a movie, because what I find is the reality of a human podcast, a human dialogue, so much more meaningful and non-scripted. And I'm not saying that great fiction and everything else, I'm tired of the same stories and being redone and everything else. Hollywood's lost that creative edge that we go back to just holding conversations,
That's fascinating. You're blowing my mind right now, by the way.
Well,
this whole conversation.
The other one is, I was talking to Steve Williams, and because I don't get to see him often, and it's
He's great, by the way.
I just love him, and it's one of those things. We're talking, and he goes, Socrates, if I ever win $1 billion, he goes, you and I'm going to set $1 million aside for you and I to do nothing more than to sit on my porch and just sit and watch our kids play and talk. And I'm like,
that's a good way to spend $1 million.
I looked at it, and I was hard pressed to think of a better way to spend $1 million.
Right.
And you just look at it and go, whether you get $1 million a day, let's make that happen.
Let's do that anyway.
Let's make that happen.
Yeah.
And I think there's something just magnificent about that.
Yeah. Well, it's something I've been reflecting on lately about what accounts for the explosion of podcasts. Like never before in human history, ever, have we had as much access to people just talking.
Right.
That's all a podcast is. Whether it's video, otherwise, it's people just talking. You have, live stream conversations like Tony Bruno's channel, and many more like that. Just hours and hours and hours produced, like billions of hours at this point, who knows, of conversation. And it's cool that, yes, the medium is there to do it, but what accounts for the interest in it? Why are we all listening to people talking versus listening to music, for example? And I think you put your finger on it. It's like our visual media, creative institutions, radio, music, movies, TV, in some sense have failed us, have lost their creative edge. And so what are we as individuals going to do? Let's create something through conversation.
Yes. And A.J. Cortez the other day, and I'm going to steal this right from him, he talked about being a dime store philosopher, but man, that guy can nail some things like
sometimes it's like 15 cents.
Yeah, 15, you get a quarter's worth. But he said something, that right now people are desperately lonely.
Oh, it's so true.
And so let's talk about the medium of a podcast. I think of the Police song, where you're talking about a message in a bottle. Mm-hmm. And you take this, and I don't have somebody to relate to, and media is such that it's I don't want to say it's garbage because it's poor quality. It's superficial. It's sugar. It's all those sort of things. Yeah, it's not deep. It's not impactful, and it's only one way, right?
Yeah, it's very clearly pushing a narrative at the expense of the actual storytelling and characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I do a podcast, I'm doing two things. I'm attempting to be seen and heard, and I'm putting my message in a bottle, and I'm casting it out into the ocean. Mm-hmm. And in the Police song, he talks about waking up in the morning, and there's 1 million bottles washed ashore.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I see podcasts and this sort of media very much like that.
Yeah.
The explosion, the proliferation of it is that everybody can put a message in a bottle and try to find some connection with somebody globally that's out there, that's not on my island of sphere of influence, that's out there, that we're not in contact.
Right.
And then hopefully that message gets to somebody who reads it. It's meaningful. And I find that conventions like this takes that and brings those islands of people together. Even if it's just for a couple of days, you end up leaving with a sense of belonging, a connection with other people who are trying and attempt to do similar type things. And you're left with an experience. You live it and breathe it, and it's a journey. Okay. Whereas if I sat in, and I hate to say it, if you're watching this now, it's a video. It's two-dimensional. There's a richness to this that you just don't have there.
Right. And it's different when the cameras turn off, because when the cameras turn off and you go behind the scenes or everything that's going on over there, you can't capture that, or should you?
No,
right. That's the stuff where the real magic happens.
Yes. And what I really love about it too is returning and seeing people have returned as well. So it's not just a snapshot right now.
Right.
It's a series, and you're able to say, where have you been? What's gone on with you, and how have you changed? Or seeing people progress. And personally, I know I focus on relationships. I'm always amazed at the number of wedding invitations I'm invited to, or pictures of kids. This is my child, or I've given 2 talks where I talk about a dad bag, being a diaper changing.
I've heard about that.
And never in my life did I ever think I would be ever talking about that. But it's not the diaper and the changing that was important. It was caring for my child and developing the pattern of behavior that my child knows when it's under duress to come to me. That the diaper changing was the symptom, but the result was I wanted the child to see by behavior that I will be there for them, I will hold them, particularly when they can't speak, that they can only cry or act. And I see that in my own daughter, and seeing that reflective, and just how powerful that has been, and to sit down and say, I can't afford to wait to be involved in her life later on. If I'm going to have value, I have to distribute, showcase that value in advance, lead by example, and you teach by doing. And part of it was just simply changing the diaper, and not just changing the diaper, becoming the best diaper changer in the world. And it wasn't because I can change the dirty diaper. It's because I cared for the child, I cared for my partner, and I actually looked further in depth than the actual act of changing a diaper, the child's needs. And I took care of all the relationships, which then made me absolutely indispensable. Nobody does a better diaper than I do. Because that they're my unit, they're my family, and that's how you care and protect and provide. You know, Ryan Mishler's, you know, that the element of preside that I actually kind of liked as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Jack Donovan talks about, you know, strength, courage, mastery, and honor, the 4 tactical virtues. And as you're describing, there's something you wanted to do it masterfully, because as a man you bring mastery to your life. You bring strength, courage, mastery, and honor. Why not bring it to changing a diaper? Not for the sake of changing a diaper, but this is another area that I can express mastery as a man.
And I actually used that in part of the talk.
Of course.
Yeah, you know, and just sit down and literally, and it was actually really funny to see Jack in the room talking about it, right? You know, and you could just see the you know, he's making the connections that his work is now being utilized for a kid's diaper, and just how wonderful that was, you know. But there really is something to that, you know. There absolutely is something to that, you know. And he's not wrong. And one of the best talks he ever gave was one of the workshops. It was not recorded. And he says, let's talk about just this, but what happens when your business uses this as a model?
He talked about business and the 4 tactical virtues?
Yes.
Amazing.
What if you had a business that said, this is our mission statement?
Wow.
We're going to apply this. Yeah. You just kind of go, you know, what would that mean? What would that look like? And it could be any number of services or products. But what happens if you say, this is how we're going to do this? And what a difference that would make in the world. Wow. And you're struck by that, you know? And so I think there's a lot of things that can be done and leveraged upon, whether it's Jack or any of the other number of guys, that you can take bits and pieces, cobble them together, and they still work, you know, and come up with something new and original and insightful.
Now talk about the 21 Convention Patriarchs event, what you saw going on there compared to years past, and some of the speakers and some of the men.
The fascinating one on that was that, you know, the Patriarch event was typically for guys that are fathers wanting to be better fathers, you know, and we realized that there was this real dearth of knowledge out there. And so one of the projects that we did, literally it started at 21 Convention on the side conversation, was how do you teach guys to father that are underfathered themselves while they're in the act of fathering. So you're having to, on the job, teach guys how to father. And so we took the notion of a children's book and in saying, look, you read to a child to be able to teach language, to spend time with them, to know that to relate with the child, to sit and hold and to engage them rather than just sort of playing games. And we chose a bullying book to help develop a skill set. Like, how do you teach your child not to get bullied? What does that look like? And how to start a conversation well outside of them, you know, like, have you seen bullying somewhere else, and how bring it forward closer to them. So the notion was always, how do we teach men who are underfathered how to father, you know, and who don't know. We're also teaching men who are fathering in the act be better fathers and men themselves, and to expose them to some of the other ideas. And so that was kind of the premise. And so we were doing that. It's evolving and developing and growing. The fascinating element was there were a number of guys at 21, the young men's group, that actually had the opportunity at will to go to the other convention and sit in on those talks, that sat down and said, I would not have paid to come to a fathering event, but because it was available, I could go next door, catch one or two, and be exposed to the information, to be exposed to that community of men before being fully committed. So it's very much like trying something on, you know, taking it out for a test drive or whatever it is, or even if it's just light exposure. So we're seeing that now take place as well. The other is we're also seeing grandfathers show up.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. So we always talk about the other. We're seeing grandfathers show up.
Whole new convention.
Yeah. But they're sitting there saying, they are realizing, because it's the patriarch, is that they're now, you know, essentially they're biologically successful, right? Their children have had children of their own. That's Darwinian successful. Wow. And they sit, So, but here's the difference though. They didn't do it with intent. They just did it, right?
Well, yeah.
And now they sit down and say, but I missed something along the way. How do I galvanize that legacy? How do I recontribute? How do I start with where I'm at and make something more of it? How do I strengthen my family tree at this relatively end stage of life? It's not too late.
So good. No, really, because I think we have a very youth-centric culture, right?
Completely,
Okay.
yeah.
And we're beginning to change that, I think, particularly with men, with the 21 Convention and stuff like that, where it's like, no, let's focus on all stages of a man's lifestyle. Like, yes, it's cool to be like young and awesome and fit and the whole thing, but like, let's think about dating. Let's think about marriage. Let's think about fatherhood.
Right.
Let's think about this. And now I'm really happy to see grandfathers are coming because there's a real lack of information about that stage of a man's life cycle.
Yes.
It's like, there's so many different aspects of being a man that crystallize in being a grandfather. Like, yes, you can't do the same things that you did when you were like a teenager. You know what I mean?
Right.
When you're the Calvin Klein cover model, whatever.
Yes.
But there's real unique power in a grandfather. I was talking to Ken Curry about this. He was saying in a man's voice and in his presence.
The gravitas.
That's right.
Yes.
And I personally believe that a cultivated man at the elder stage, the grandfather stage, has more power than like a dozen young men.
Well, it's experiential wisdom.
Yes.
Experiential wisdom. And,
gravitas, yeah.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I'm gonna, it's not that the grandfathers are now showing up. They were there from the beginning.
Right.
And some of them are returnees. They've been to every one. The difference, though, is they're finding their voice. They're being seen amongst the group now.
Yes.
And so even within...
They're not ashamed of being older.
Yeah, and they're not insecure about being there. They're actually more willing to talk to the other guys, to engage the other guys. And in many ways, they're ambassadors of the event itself. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing that. And so it's within a kind of a group, you're seeing them kind of take ownership of that kind of group and spirit, not only within their own families, but within the group of men that are showing up.
Right.
And it's fantastic to see, some of these guys, the older guys, show up and to you literally go over and talk to some of the younger guys, finding out what their interests are and being, again, mentors to other men as it should be, and I hate to say it in part, this is why you come.
Yeah.
The idea is that you're not just looking for information, you're looking for direct experience, people who are role modeling it,
Yes.
and we've had grandfathers speak it. Texas Dom is one of the guys I just love, at the convention. And he said something that I know is so true. It shocked me the moment I heard it, but it's something terribly natural. He literally said that and this is a man who just loves his children. That it's not a profession of a lack of love. It's amazing how much you can love your child and how insignificant your child becomes the moment you see and hold your grandchild.
I've heard that. Yeah.
And it allows me to make for amends of all the mistakes and fallacies or inadequacies of me as a man and as a father. Mm-hmm. That I can see past and through that. I'm not the individual. I'm not the man in the arena anymore. I'm the guiding hand that can help hold and contain my family unit to assist and alleviate where needed and to influence in positive ways. Mm-hmm. And I find that just a tremendous testament to the man, to his sense of himself, his obligations to his family, and it's a wonderful, wonderful human sentiment.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask a philosophical question here because we're in it now. I'm struck with this notion that in some ways it feels like society has too low expectations for men, right? In some ways, like mediocrity seems to kind of be the norm in many ways, right?
And celebrated.
And celebrated.
Yeah.
But it also feels like there's a flip side to that where society has too much like over expectations for men. So, for example, any man is naturally going to be imperfect as a man and therefore will be imperfect in his fathering.
Right.
And it seems like there's been a generation of kids that came up maybe through the inner work world where it's like, my father did this and my father did this. And yes, there's obviously cases for abuse and neglect and those sort of things. But where you take like, yeah, my dad was a man and he screwed up because he's a man. And it's like, you got to be able to see that and let that go. But it seems like there's a lot of holding on to like, my dad should have known whatever.
Right.
This is maybe why I like Jesse Lee Peterson, where he's like, have you forgiven your mother? Have you forgiven your father? Right. But I guess in that, it's kind of like, what's that divide between the expectation of mediocrity, setting the bar too low, versus setting the bar too high, like you should have been perfect? And maybe the 21 Convention is like saying, no, it's okay to be a man and to be imperfect and to always be striving. Right.
I think it's in part, culture lives downstream of so many things, right? Or
consciousness.
Consciousness.
That's what my friend Arthur Blood and Rain says. Like politics is downstream from culture, but culture is downstream from consciousness.
Right.
Loved it when he said that.
And so let's talk about what we're infusing our culture with. Our heroes are not men who rise above.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
They're men that massively overachieve. But that's not the hero we're really selling. Who are we really selling out in the media, in the public? It's superheroes. And men who are they're not even human anymore. They're fictional. I mean, there's no attempt. You have to be some far off alien brought to Earth with Superman.
Man.
You don't have a chance. The only superhero out of the whole group that's human, that doesn't have some God gift, is Batman.
Yeah, but I was going to say, or Hawkeye. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And even then, they're superhuman, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he's a billionaire.
For starts.
And
then it goes from there, right?
Yeah.
And so what is some kids
versus like a Luke Skywalker, who's like some poor kid living on a desert planet who discovers his innate potential and manifests it.
And honestly, how revolting in your presentation, the destruction of that hero.
Oh man! Once you see that.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where I saw it and I couldn't give voice to it.
Yeah.
I just felt physically ill, and I'd let go of that whole thing for forever. And honestly, there was only one Star Wars. There's only one. The boys in the house.
Empire?
No, actually Star Wars. And
Star
even
Wars.
That was if I really honestly were to look at it, it was a disappointment to me.
I didn't know.
They should have stopped with one. And just I'm
hot take.
Just don't talk to me about the other six. I don't care. It's only one done amazingly well.
Yeah.
But to sit down, they had to destroy your gods. You had to destroy your models.
And Han Solo.
All of them.
Yeah.
And whether it's not shooting first or any of that, all that. There's been a conscious effort.
Well, his son, like, you know what I mean? Like that was just horrible.
And these are our myths. These are this is the things that we're culturing
the myths that is trying to be imposed on us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I find is that if we can culture people with real life people, human conditions, and showcase heroism in the day-to-day achievable things and to grow from there, I think we'll have a vastly different culture. But right now, I think fantasy and fiction have become subconsciously embedded into our consciousness and expectation.
Interesting, because I think we're here at this in-person event where men are seeing each other as men. Right? These are the things that we all share. These are the things that we all go through. We get to see each other's humanity. Like I had friends coming who had, from my Renaissance of Men Council group, who had been enjoying the content, let's say, of so many different creators, yourself included, but like Jack Donovan and Alexander Cortez and Tanner Guzzi and Anthony, et cetera. The whole, and these men seem almost larger than life through social media, especially Jack Donovan with the character that he creates.
I introduced him as a live action, literally a live action, superhero. I mean, and he is. He manifests that.
He manifests that, and he creates that through social media. It's very intentional. But then my guys are coming here, and they're like, okay, who are these guys in person? Once you actually meet them, do they all sit aside behind some velvet rope, with their sunglasses on indoors, like don't talk? Yeah, I'll sign autographs.
It's like the VIP section of whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But instead, what they found is what the truth is. It's like, no, we're all just men.
Yeah.
It is possible to be authentic and to include the larger than life parts of your personality, and then to just kind of put that away and be just the guy you are.
Right.
And to go back and forth and to manifest that greatness within yourself. And you don't stop being great when you put it away, but it's like to show up on social media is different than you show up in person. And that can all be part of being a congruent man.
Yes.
And I think for men, it may be difficult to see that through the fourth wall or whatever, right? But that's the magic of what goes on here is like, no, we're all three-dimensional men and human beings.
And beyond that, it's not just that you see that once or twice or just in passing. Like in other conventions, the talent shows up, they present, they may have a meet and greet, and they're out.
Yeah.
Right?
Here
it's 4 days, and for the most part, all the speakers stay around. They attend the other speeches. You have multiple social cigars and talk at length. And honestly, the best times are after 10 o'clock, where everyone's sitting around the pool talking or carrying on a conversation. You and Jack that one year, I can remember
last year,
literally I left you guys late because I knew I needed to get some sleep, and I was speaking in the morning.
Yeah.
And then as I'm heading back to the convention, you guys are literally coming up at daybreak, heading back to change and shower.
Stayed up talking all night,
and you absolutely knew you guys were talking like, and you have that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the number of times I've had guys to sit down and say, yeah, I'm not talking here, and I'm actually bumping into somebody to my left, and I turn, and here it is, it's AJ Cortez himself, or Jack Donovan, or whatever it is, and one of the guys is like looking at Jack, and Jack has to grab the guy and goes, it's me. And I just, I can remember the same thing. And I hate, it's going to sound really weird. I've done this for 11 years, and 21 times. And there are new speakers that I know are coming that I'm excited to speak. Kind of like, you're kind of a fanboy myself, right? Like I want to meet this individual, and it's really weird to be able to do that. And I value that experience, and I know that I have that here. Absolutely have that here. And in all honesty, I think we need more than just the 21 convention or 22. I think we need a lot more of this in life, in the world. Yeah. And this sort of idea needs to grow across the spectrum.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I think of like Ian Smith. Ian Smith is almost like a world leader, not a world leader in like the political sense, but it's like he's Ian Smith.
Right.
And there he is hanging out, having dinner, having drinks, smoking a cigarette.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, he's just like right there next to Jack Donovan. Like, is this real life?
Yeah, right.
And it is real life.
It is. It is. It absolutely is. And what I like about it is that Anthony's done a really good job at not only vetting a lot of the speakers, but getting people who are personal and willing to do that.
Yeah.
And the interesting enough is that there's something wrong when the person doesn't do that. It's usually a tell.
Right.
And so because you'll have people
anyone
come
who has it really,
Yeah, and to be honest, having seen that kind of spectrum, there are some people who have come and gone, you don't see them, there's some conflicts, and Anthony at times will actually have somebody he brings in that he completely disagrees with, but puts them opposite of somebody else to hear two stories, so it was really interesting that.
Very brave.
Yeah, brave, where you have somebody talking about monogamy and religion and how important family is, and then bringing in a polygamist.
Yeah. Oof.
One, two, and then have them on a panel. Interestingly enough, we have learned though, you don't bring in the fit and cardio folks together. That usually is a little more confrontational.
Oh, meaning the weightlifting and cardio folks?
Weightlifting and cardio folks.
No,
that needs to be divided out.
But we don't need to go there.
but it was kind of funny hearing some of this stuff, where you're on a panel and somebody just kind of leans over and looks.
It's like awkward.
Keep those two out.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's not that everyone's going to agree here, and that's kind of very important. You're going to have conflicting information at times. People believe very different things. The religious panel.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
Eastern Orthodox, Mormon, Protestant Christian. Jack's a pagan.
The first night, we're at the pool. It's, the meet and greet after the meet and greet. The convention hasn't started yet, and I'm with Jeff Younger, who's Orthodox. I have Michael Foster as a pastor, and we're sitting and we're starting to have a conversation, and they immediately go to religion, and it goes deep. I mean, so deep. I'm trying to even understand the words they're using that have met. And I just sat there and I go, I'm just going to put my, I figuratively say, I'm just going to kick my foot in the pool. You guys just go on.
Do your thing.
And for the next 45 minutes, they had one of the most profound conversations back and forth that was amenable, that was sincere, honest, with integrity, with respect. Yep. And you just sit down and go, my God, the chance to just be the fly in that wall. And two guys that you would think would be vehemently opposed to each other.
In the world, it would seem that would be the case. Religious conflict is intense.
And what was interesting, they like each other.
Yeah.
As people.
Yeah.
And there's something terribly wonderful about that. And so I'm really glad that we had that panel to be able to come up, and so that got captured on film. As opposed to that was an experience I had that not everybody else had because nobody else was around at the moment. That now is shared and be viewed, and I honestly hope that helps bring others in to sit down and say, hey, we do have these experiences. There is room for a growth. It's not just where this thing started. Unfortunately, it started with pickup and has all that baggage with it.
But those are the frontiers at the time.
And it really was.
It's like this is the new edgy stuff to explore. Let's explore it. But the frontier has moved on. but that doesn't mean it wasn't valuable for what it was.
Right, and I view it as kind of like the Wild West frontier. It was this chaos, and it was a boom town.
Yeah.
And in any of those shows of boom towns, whether it's a railroad show where they have the stops and it's nothing but tents and all the debauchery and the stupidity and the depravity, it was. I mean, there's no doubt it was. But I've always been fascinating about how either fallen societies or boom towns, how they start from that point and then transcend into civilization.
Yes.
Okay, and which ones do it well and where it falls. And so that's been kind of, everybody studies the fall.
Go ahead, sorry, finish the thought.
No,
Go ahead.
And so I see that happening with, Pickup and Manosphere and Red Pill and all that sort. I see the boomtown era disappearing and civilizations arriving. The roads are getting paved. The stores now have swinging front doors. We now have restrooms indoors. Running water. Right?
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I see in many ways civilization entering into this realm.
Well, very literally, because we have Arthur Kwan Lee, a internationally acclaimed fine artist speaking here.
Incredibly.
And that's the highest level of civilization is the art it produces.
It is the expression. Yeah, absolutely. And not just an artist, a man who's a philosopher, deeply religious, deeply committed to family, and expressed into his art. I just absolutely awesome. Yeah. Absolutely awesome.
As you were saying that, what makes me think what really begins to shift the boomtown into civilization is the arrival of the law. Right, the law, not just the sheriff, but something beyond that.
Yeah, and we kind of gone through a little bit of that, and it's really ugly. So for example,
you get all the bandits on the outside of town that are used to kind of having their way with things, and then the law shows up as like the new sheriff in town.
New sheriff town, and it's really ugly and it's messy, and that did come. And that there's a degree of self-regulation, and that's taking place.
Right.
And I use the analogy of Tombstone, which is partial to me from being in the West, and I went to school in Arizona.
The movie,
very much so.
Movie.
But it was based on reality. That was all based on reality.
Yeah,
and the real life was more fabulous than the story, the movie they did. The reality of it was much more extreme. And violent, and just incredibly violent. Yeah. But you have this sort of how do you get rid of the grifters and that sort of cleaning up the sheer fraudulent behavior in some of the cases. But I think you also need to move on it. But civilization, the other part, and it shows up in Tombstone as well as many of the other genres, is when the arts start to arrive, and typically it's a traveling theater that shows up. Civilization's on, and that's when the cowboys that are wearing dirty, that have just nothing but a spittoon, and your whiskey is either poured in a clean glass or a dirty one, and that sort of level of behavior. And all of a sudden they're dusting themselves off to present even minor airs of presentation. And we've seen that with Tanner Guzy arriving to the 21 Convention, bringing a sense of style and everything else, and doing it in an unapologetic masculine way.
Very much.
And so I've seen that transformation as well, and I see that continuing. The guys were giving me a bad time because I happen to wear the same shirt that I spoke in, because I never left the convention area, right?
Sure.
And they had gone back. Well, I can get away.
That's my favorite of your shirt.
It is. This is the best one for the week. But they went and got jackets and little and they dressed for dinner.
Nice.
And I'm like, boomtown it, right? You're just like, there was something immensely respectful. They were representing themselves, and they were representing a moment as well. This isn't normal. We're gonna honor this moment by our presence, by how we handle that. And I thought, well, fucking done. I'm just well done.
Yeah. So it's like this process of maturation. Well, it also makes me think, what about the female speakers, Suzanne Venker and Melissa Isaac, coming in and speaking here? And these are women with established brands or careers and audiences who've come in to complement everything that's already going on. Like men and women are complementary.
Yes. And it's not only do they have something to say, they have something critical to say. So
very much.
And that was kind of the surprise on the first 22 convention, was that we had a guest speaker at the very end that was a woman speak.
Jennifer Molesky.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And sharp and funny and humorous, and just in that pure girl next door kind of spirit and health and beauty. And she radiates and glows that. Just absolutely, love her. And the only thing better than Jen Molesky is her partner and husband. Dale. It's just, God, I love that guy. And so you have that. Then you have Anthony wanted to increase the more women to talk, and that was critical.
Yeah,
so it's not just men lecturing to women.
The mansplaining event of the century, let's dial back it. Yeah.
You sell it that way, but then you deliver.
Exactly.
You deliver.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm blowing this one too, but we're already talking about there needs to be a 22 convention strictly women presenters.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
That'd
Yeah.
be,
To get women to kind of do it for themselves, to have that venue and say, hey, look, it's not not just men talking to women. Here you go.
That would actually be the ideal. I mean, I think it's important because this subject has come up multiple times during the weekend that, you know, women do, while there is this whole thing about mansplaining or whatever,
right.
You know, there is an aspect of masculine authority, masculine competence where men can in fact speak to men, and yes, they can speak to women. There's a component, I think mansplaining has this implication of being condescending. Like a man speaking to a woman is naturally condescending,
right.
Which I think is a pollution. You know, it's a corruption of an idea, because that's not necessarily true. Yes, of course, men can be condescending to men. Yes, of course, men can be condescending to women. But a man, by nature, speaking to a woman is not being condescending. And so this has come up multiple times during the convention, where it's like women do listen to men who project authority, and that's fundamentally and competence. That is fundamentally a good thing. And yet, women speaking to women, as you say, about these issues, about femininity, about masculinity, about their true natures, is even more powerful because they get the chance to model it in a way that men don't.
And that you're hitting something right on the head.
Yeah.
And we know the reality in many cases, the messenger becomes a message.
Yeah, medium is the message, right?
Yeah, right. And I don't care if, you know, a lot of the talks, we're saying things that we were saying 5, 6, 7 years ago. The facts haven't changed.
Yeah.
You know? But the difference is if you hear it and it takes that speaker to get that point across and for you to absorb it, that's what we want.
Whatever it takes to
whether
click.
It's me or somebody else or whoever it is, you just keep trying and changing that message or messenger, you know, and if it finally you pick it up, you know, it's a book you've read before and you pick it up again, finding all of a sudden a passage strikes you differently because of the context where you're in. It's been there the whole time, you've read it before, but now this is resonating. Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah, there's a quote that reading is rereading. So the first time you read a book, you're just catching the overall themes and flow of the thing. But the second time you read a book, that's when you actually read the book.
Yeah,
you know,
I think so too.
Very similar. Well, you bring up the future of the 21 convention. You have enough, other than Anthony, right, who would be the guy on the ground, knowing exactly the direction, driving the bus. You know, you've seen what you said, 11, 12 years, something of the trajectory of the thing, along with the trajectory of the men's space and the trajectory of society. Like, tie those three together.
Oh my, you know, and I have a profoundly unfair position, you know, because
Cheating.
Yeah, Anthony and I are close physically in proximity, so it's not uncommon for him to meet up. We go to dinner, he comes over to the house, we talk, so we're bouncing ideas constantly, absolutely insider intel back and forth. But for the 21 convention and everything else, he drives the bus. It is his bus completely. I'm just the first seat over here, you know, taking the tour and contributing.
Maybe you've got the map, and
but
you know what I mean.
I know technically where we're going on the tour, but man, he's his own man completely.
Yeah.
But I think he's finding his own way, and his life arc is changing. You know, he's now 33, right?
Yeah. It's a big transition point for a man.
Yeah, and here's a man who's gone through marriage and a bad divorce, incredibly bad, and I was there for that. And you're seeing as he matures in his arc that he's looking ahead. And it goes back to when he was a 17-year-old punk. And I mean that in a very sincere way, just energy and focus and driving conviction. But he knew enough that he wanted to surround himself with mentors. He wanted these relationships. He had an interest in this, so he found somebody he would believe in. You know, whether it's Ayn Rand and Ayn Rand's past. So he found, you know, the Ayn Rand Institute and brought one of their speakers in. You know, he developed those relationships. So he ends up starting with this circle of mentors himself, and then he so damn graciously shares that free to the world, films this stuff always at the best that he could afford at the time and what technology would allow.
The scale of technical production at this event is insane. I came last year and I saw it, but I didn't really see it.
Right.
This year I saw it. It's like cameras and photographers and you know, angles and lighting and video. It's incredible w's going on here.
Yeah, and the
it's
audio,
invisible.
the audio, completely invisible.
Yeah.
And that's that is the backbone of something. And there's all these other elements that he orchestrates as well.
For sure.
But
like that guy.
Yeah, that guy. What's interesting is seeing that he's open and looking ahead of where his life's going and what's impacting, and he's bringing the folks together. And the other is he's also very consciously looking at society.
Oh, yeah.
In a very sincere way.
Society's kind of forcing you to look at it like,
you know,
I don't want to. Fine.
And you know, you hear him being terribly bombastic about feminism and everything else, and he says it in terribly unelegant ways and just very guttural and completely. And you know, and part of me goes, oh damn, you know, the messenger and the message, you know, become linked, and everybody can point to that, and they're 100% absolutely right, but it's not out of malice. There is a point to it. I wish in some cases you know, you want everything in one body, and you're not going to get it. Right. No individual is going to embodiment everything. But at the same time, he has this knack of bringing others along to other voices, and he promotes that. He pushes that, and he does it graciously. I see this kind of moving along, and the thing that I kind of worry about is that the ideas we're talking about are going to grow and balloon so large that no one individual is going to be able to kind of orchestrate some of this stuff. Is that one organization isn't going to be sufficient.
Oh,
you know.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ears. There need to be millions of men doing this. You know what I mean? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. In different ways,
right,
different expressions of masculinity.
Yeah, and so an interesting thing is Anthony's never had an issue with any of the speakers going and talking at other conventions, as long as they weren't competing directly with 21C. And that's just a straight business thing. Be
honorable about it. We don't need to compete as men.
Absolutely. And where there have been issues with this, it has been a very serious broach of faith, of trust, of relationships. They were betrayals, and in particularly when they were absolutely pointedly decided to be so.
Yeah, and the decision was made.
Shameful.
Yeah.
Absolutely fucking shameful. And a lot of it's ego-based. It
doesn't need to be that way.
No, it absolutely does not. And so I look forward to the day in which we can have not only other conventions, other ideas, and not be competitive in nature, but supporting and synergy between the groups. How can we work together? How can we share? How can we relate? How can we ally and support each other?
Yes. How can we network? How can we coordinate?
You know, and to grow a tribe beyond 150 relationships. Because that's the thing, you know, and
which we have the capability to do now with the internet, and
right, and quite honestly, you know, we talk about the messengers. You can have different messengers saying the exact same things, or groups of men, but I think their personalities and the leadership styles lend a different cultural influence in hand. Yeah. And we need to find it. It's almost like, you know, a religious experience, you know, shopping for your church, you know, that sort of thing, you know, and I don't mean it just in a religious way, you know, it could be a financial issue. It could be a nutritional health.
Yeah, exactly.
Fitness, whatever it is.
Going into the marketplace and finding the thing that suits your needs.
Right. Yeah. You know, and in many cases, I think there's almost too many different things going on sometimes in these conventions, because you don't have a chance to really dive deep into
walking like between conversations in the hallway, conversations by the pool, individuals meeting, two conventions, you know,
which was the power of the Patriarch Convention. Okay, you know, so it's men about fathering. It's no longer about all these others. You don't necessarily have all finance and that's for 21C.
Got it.
But I can see eventually that kind of factoring out where you have a specialty breakout conference for, you know, within the other summits of
or a day or an afternoon. You know, like this afternoon we're covering this set of topics with this speaker, so you know, like, okay, so I'm interested in finance and fitness and father. Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things I like too is the notion of the breakout workshops, where you can go deeper. And the thing that I really like about that is that they're not filmed. So you have a discussion, you have a talk, they get a sense of who you are, and now you don't have to stand in front of a microphone and be filmed and ask a question, or even try to, you know, God forbid,
be present in front of a crowd.
And then I'm trying to say something that doesn't look foolish and ask a question or whatever, and more importantly, even
at the same time,
having a discussion, you know, that was really kind of neat, you know, and being able to
kind of you hosted a workshop, didn't you?
I did, and it was really interesting. I actually was concerned that the guys, because I intentionally avoid the notion of violence, right? You know, I bring it up and I talk about the risks and everything else.
Yeah, like you said earlier in our conversation, like let's avoid that as a societal outcome.
Yeah, it's societal outcome. And I didn't want the non-film portion to be, hey, what's your recipe for syntax?
By the way, exactly.
You know,
by the way, guys.
You know, if you combine these two products together, you know, and you know, if you place this here, you know, I did not want that.
Don't Google that. Don't Google
that. You know, but somebody did talk about, when do you defend yourself? And I even said there is that threshold. There is a moral responsibility.
And even the
threshold.
law acknowledges that.
Yeah, correct. And not
religion
only our own
acknowledges
military acknowledges
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But the thing is, it's already baked into the cake, right? As a society. We have these laws and regulations, and the military is constrained by military law.
For sure.
Okay, with civilian
And
oversight.
some amount of international law as well.
Right, yeah, 100%. But when you act independently,
yes,
you are 100% responsible for that. And man, that is some really thin ice out there.
Yeah.
Really thin ice.
For many reasons.
Yes. And the risk, so one of the things I sat down and told the Patriarch group, have you had to talk about what's your family going to do when they lose you? Oof. And we know your wife is going to remarry, right? We know in the military we talk about Jody, the guy who's sleeping with your wife while you're deployed. Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to happen when you're down? We also know in the military it's not uncommon for guys who serve closely, even like let's say police forces, guys that serve closely together when you lose a partner, that your former partner and your spouse get together out of related trauma, and it's terribly human. You can feel skeezy about it. You can sit up at a very real human issue. This is how we resolve pain and trauma and all sorts of stuff. Wow. Are you willing to have that conversation with them? Are you really okay with saying, hey, because my willingness to serve my nation and take up arms, I'm going to turn my wife into a single mother and my children are going to have all the effects? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This is what you have at risk. This is what's at stake.
If you choose violence. It's not a conversation about men who join the military per se. It's about men who choose violence as their preferred means of resistance. Well, what if that doesn't go well for you? What about your family? That's what we're talking about, as opposed to military service members.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But let's go there for a second, and because it was one of the things I wanted to talk about and I didn't. We had service members killed on the Afghanistan withdrawal. One of the most egregious was the young man who had a newborn that was due to arrive. Yeah. And I look at this as from a men's rights perspective. It's like, did that young man need to go? No. And the answer is no. Could somebody have served his place? Right. And do I fault his command? No. But at the same time, I fault the higher command. If that we have a nation that hasn't looked at that and said, you know what, you're deploying into a combat zone, you're in a combat position, you're expecting father. And as an American value, we're pulling you offline so you can see your job. And we're going to send somebody else instead.
Yes. I'll add some nuance to that. The nuance to that would be like, I don't know, I haven't served, but I don't know if you can say like, well, we're going to provide exceptions for service with men who have newborns coming or just born, like within whatever, some, let's say arbitrarily 6-month window. I think, I don't know if you can do it, but I know what you can do is you can say the leaders of the military hierarchy up all the way up to the commander-in-chief take accountability for the loss of every single human life due to their incompetence. And so like you may not be able to prevent the man from being killed, but you can say, my failure of leadership is why this man was killed. Right. And I take personal accountability for that, and to feel the grief of that, of the loss of that man and the child that will never know his father. And to have some compassion, something.
I will take it one step further.
Please.
I think as a nation, we have an obligation to that mother and to that child to step into their lives and support them.
That's right. That's right.
Very much like how Jeff Younger was talking about when you see a service member deploy, who mows their lawn, who's taking care of this, who's making sure their kids are getting to karate class or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever the case may be. And as a society, I think we have an obligation to do more than just, grieve to a widow and say, my condolences.
Right, yeah. Men are expected to be superheroes. Those are a myth. Right. But men are also disposable. Like, square that for me.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, you have to be the superhuman thing who's able to do all the things and man up. And when we tell you to, but when we don't need you, whatever. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, and the other one is I was struck by the image of the female Marine as well that was killed. That days before, she's literally cradling a child. And this isn't just an enlisted woman. She's an NCO, a non-commissioned officer in the Marine Corps, skilled, competent, dedicated. And she literally in her social media post just prior to her death says, I love my life. I love what I do. And I look at that and go, that's the greatness of our country, that we have individuals like that, men and women, serving in our armed forces, doing exactly that. And I never knew her in life.
Sure.
But I think that's a memory of her and what she did through her death. And that's not lost on me. And I think there's something to be said tremendously about that.
I'm so grateful that we have this platform to talk about these issues as men, you and me, 21 Report, 21 Convention, because these conversations aren't really happening in the same, out in the world, or aren't happening in the same way, framed in the context of masculinity.
Try to tweet that.
I will.
And in all honesty, I tried. There were a number of times, and it falls flat. And I say this, and it bothers me because, one of the reasons I'm bringing it up now is because I know that this is a platform on which others will see.
Sure.
Is that I felt impotent in my inability to tongue that, to speak that truth.
Yeah.
That it didn't give that weight, that sense of loss, that sense of value and appreciation. And I know there are other men and women out there doing that today. That stand ready to do that. They're volunteering. I'm just dumbstruck by that. I'm dumbstruck that after all this, we still have people willing to do that.
Yeah, we've got several powerful social media outlets, Instagram, Twitter, etc. YouTube escalates that. Well, TikTok is a small form. YouTube escalates that to long form video. Podcast escalates that to long form audio.
Absolutely.
But there's still something incredibly powerful about getting together in person to have these discussions, by breaking down these digital walls and actually being face to face.
Well, and I would say our conversation right now is kind of reflective of some of the things that we would probably have with a drink in our hand.
Exactly.
So, yeah, completely.
Exactly.
And I long for it in my own personal life. I look forward to it, and it's one of the reasons why I just keep coming back.
Yeah.
And I joke with Anthony. It's like whether you have me up or not, I just want to attend. Just exactly. one way or the other.
Just to be here.
One way or the other.
I just want to touch on one more issue. It had come up earlier, and the thought was in my mind, like, we have all these men doing all these different things with masculinity. How do we get them all going in the same direction? And the word that came to mind is harmonize. We don't all have to be singing the same note. In fact, we shouldn't be singing the same note. How do we take everything that we're all singing together with the different themes, and how do we bring them together into one chorus for maximum volume?
It's interesting. I think it's very much like driving. When you're first starting to drive, you're not looking past the steering wheel. Like, it's literally what's 2 feet in front of the bumper, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of men that are focusing in on their specific issue, and they're looking just at that, just what's right in front of the car. Yeah. And when we start getting more people on the road, we're worried about bumping into each other, and there's going to be a degree of that. But I think when we think aspirationally, we're looking way down the road, and it's so much easier to drive a car when you're looking way down the road and responding in time with things much further out. And so I think if we're going to harmonize, we need to think aspirational. What are our real goals? What does success look like? Okay,
let's envision that.
Yeah, it's a vision. And so for right now, I would sit down and say the Manosphere has very much lacked that. We're looking inward, what we want to gain, but we're not looking at something.
Of the journey.
Yeah, we're not looking at, like when between two people, there's a relationship. There's you, there's me, and then there's the relationship. We're not looking at the relationship and where does this relationship want to go? This energy. And so
and how do we bring other people into the relationship?
Yeah. And I think we've kind of in many cases lost a narrative of where's this kind of arc going and what are we truly looking to achieve. And I think if we're going to have a group of men that are concerned about that kind of needs to be answered. It needs to be identified clearly, and I think that message needs to be created and then, I don't want to say professed, but it needs to be released to the public.
Propagated.
Yeah, propagated. Yeah, it was a great word. And I think we're missing that component. Get that right, and you're on top of a rocket. You are on top of a rocket.
Sounds amazing.
It is. I hope to take that ride. I hope to either and I say that living in Central Florida, where it's almost kind of like watching NASA. Of I'm not involved in that, but I get to watch it. And there's something magical about watching a rocket take flight. All this energy and technology all in a little thing at distance, and all the hopes and ambitions of the thing just sort of launching and going and going and going. And you know it's not safe until that final separation, and it's hit orbit. And there's something about watching that crest over the horizon into the darkness and just saying Godspeed.
Thank you, Socrates.
Thank you.
This is Will Spencer with the Renaissance of Men here with the new 21 Report and Socrates. Thanks for watching.